Welcome back to Life's Journey. I'm Dr. Ralph Smith, and it's certainly a pleasure that you've joined us today. For all my patients and clients in Idaho, a special welcome to them. I know a lot of times that when we do court-ordered work with different folks in Idaho and Washington, we always require them to watch some of these TV shows and write a report. And we do that for the purposes of making sure that between the workbook, their life coach sessions, watching this show, and the final testing, that they don't relapse. And that's why we're very proud of the fact that Jenny Marie Wellness, at this point, the relapse rate is only 2.43%. And we're really proud of that. That's a big deal to us. Okay, this one focuses on the cognitive process. Now, a lot of folks maybe are not aware of the term cognitive, and it's interpreted a lot of different ways. One thing that I've noticed in working with the court systems, and we've worked with them for the last 10, 15 years all over the Northwest, is a lot of judges are starting to require that folks take a cognitive class or a cognitive course as part of their, quote, rehabilitation. A lot of them say it's called punishment, but let's just take the positive side of that and call it rehabilitation. And there's a reason for that. And I'm not going to give you the dry clinical explanation of the cognitive process. We could sit there and talk for an hour on that. So I'm just going to give you the highlights, or what I refer to as the summaries of that. The cognitive process is, in the simplest form, is how you live life in the process you go through when you make decisions. And we make decisions all the time. You know, it could be a matter of driving the car and saying, you know, that light's going to turn yellow. Should I go ahead and start stopping now? And then looking in your rearview mirror and seeing how close you're being followed. Cognitive process, as far as that could be the matter of your children. That you know they're going to ask to get out and to be back at, let's say, midnight, and you want them home at 10 o'clock, and then you're in a series of negotiations. That's, again, another cognitive process. But let's break it down and make it even easier than that. The way the human brain works, and I'll give you an honorary PhD or an MD degree when this part is done, is that your brain is basically developed in an overall sense of what they refer to as your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. Now, the difference is, in the conscious mind, that's the part of your brain that makes decisions. Like when you're having a discussion with someone, or an argument with somebody, or you're talking about politics or whatever. Your conscious mind is in full drive because you're reacting to information, you're giving your opinion. It's just really an active part of your brain. And that example I used about driving a car and the light changing, it's a conscious decision for you to make based on your life experiences of stopping at a red light and not running that red light and perhaps killing someone or killing yourself. It's a conscious decision to stop at stop signs. It's a conscious decision if you drive through my neighborhood in Port Angeles that these young kids, they really don't know that cars on the right have the right of way. All they know is they're cruising through that four area, we call it four corner area. So I make a point that when I'm driving in my neighborhood of literally stopping, I look in the rearview mirror first, but stopping and making sure that the traffic is clear in all three directions, left, right, and straight ahead. Now, if someone's following my tail, I might avoid doing that, but that's an individual situation. The subconscious mind is the most complex part of your brain. To give you an example, it's like a big sponge. You live your life, and all the lessons you've learned, the successes, the tragedies, the mistakes, all that, are kept in your subconscious mind. If you believe in psychics, and by the way, I do, that's how they get their information, is they get a link in through different forms, and I won't go into psychic readings with you, but different forms of getting connected to your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind also does not have the inhibitions that you might have in a conscious mind, where you start thinking, well, you know, if I do that, this is going to happen. Or if I do that, that's going to happen. It's much more freewheeling and ready to go. But the danger in a subconscious mind is the capacity to maintain all of that information, and it's there to stay. It is literally there to stay. Now, there are design therapies that can relieve some of that. There are different processes through chemical medication they can try to do that. But in general, when you have an experience, it stays there. That is the reason why the mental wellness business where the mental health business is so big, because no matter how much medications you give somebody, that subconscious mind is still working, and it's still giving them information about how to live life and the mistakes that have made in the past. And by the way, the role that the subconscious mind plays, which is the biggest role that would affect Sean, affect me, anybody else watching the show, that's where your dreams come from. Have you ever noticed that when you take sleeping medications, sometimes you dream a lot? And that's basically part of that medication purpose. Whatever medication you may take, relaxes that subconscious where those thoughts are processed instead of being kept in reserve. So you'll wake up sometimes, especially if you take sleeping medication or you have sleep apnea, whatever, with a lot of things going on in your mind where, man, they almost seem real. And then you wake up and you realize, no, it was just a dream. Dreams can be fantasy dreams. You know, that's another thing where people get in trouble in their relationships because they may be having a fantasy dream out of their subconscious and mention names that maybe the other partner doesn't want to hear. Doesn't mean that they're cheating. It means that basically that's the way their brain works. So in managing that subconscious mind, you've got to be open to releasing that information. Whether you believe in psychics or not, whether you believe in therapy or not, whatever process you have there, that part of your psyche will always be there. And to avail yourself of that psyche gives you the life experiences you need to make good, solid decisions. Now, one of the things that's really important, and it's just really important, so underline the word important, I've said it 3 times now, is reactionary decisions. It is perfectly normal and acceptable to have reactionary decisions through the conscious mind because you need that quick access of making decisions. When you get to the subconscious mind, it's not quite as easy as that. The subconscious mind is a very difficult thing to feather out. Now, feathering out the subconscious mind is to give you either decisions made in the past that went well, to give you information that you might need to come up with decisions, and that's why the criminal court system really thinks this is important. Because if a person violates the law, whether it be anger management, domestic management, battering, substance abuse, all those things all relate back to the issue of making good, solid decisions. And if you're in a reactionary mode, and I've used these examples before in the seminars I've done, is your chance of having the correct answer when you react in the subconscious is only 1 out of 4, which means 25% of those decisions are good decisions. The other 75% is questionable. And the only thing that's good about 1 out of 4 is if you play second base for the Seattle Mariners. I know the coach would really love to have a second baseman that hits at least 250. But this isn't baseball. This is the game of life. So you want to really think carefully about that. So the process of how to manage that subconscious, we're going to handle that after our break. But the key is try to avoid what I call reactionary decisions in the subconscious mind. Have that dial turned fully up on the conscious mind so you pay attention and you do the things you need to do. If you see someone walking close to the crosswalk, assume that they're going to go to that crosswalk because you sure don't want to kill somebody. If you're sitting there and you're being tailed by someone in a vehicle that's in some big hurry, move off to the side. That's why they have turnouts on a lot of these highways, especially up in our beautiful mountains, is for those people who are in a big hurry, get in that turnout and let that traffic flow by you. In fact, most states, including Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, if you have more than 5 vehicles behind you, you can be ticketed for that. So don't worry about the law, just pull off to the side. And if you have someone following you really close, then just go ahead and pull into a slower lane so they can get past you. Why is that a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because of road rage. Where do you think that comes from? It comes from people who get over anxious. Maybe they had a bad time at work. Maybe they got fired at work. Maybe they're coming down after being drunk all night. You have no way of knowing who's sitting in that other car behind that wheel. So the best thing you do is take yourself out of that equation. Save a life, and perhaps even save your own life. Now, the danger in subconscious is a real big problem, is the fact that a lot of people come up with Band-Aid solutions. Now, what is a Band-Aid solution? A Band-Aid solution is a decision you make that you know it's not going to work long term, but you just make a decision. And I could give you many examples of that. It could be raising the children and letting them go have a more of a curfew. It could be anything in your relationship with your spouse of saying, hey, I'm going to be home at 6 o'clock at night, getting home at 8 o'clock at night, and not calling your significant other. That's a problem. That's a Band-Aid solution. So what's very important is you avoid Band-Aid solutions. That if you have to make a decision, you make that decision on the basis of the information you have, input from others, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and making a decision and making sure it works for as long a term as possible. That's a critical part of the whole situation. So avoiding, what I call reactive decisions, avoiding the Band-Aid approach of solving problems, think them out, and I'm going to give you the guidelines here after the break on how you put together a chart for the major decisions you make. I won't break it down for the minor ones, but just the major decisions. And the other thing is having that conscious and subconscious mind linked to where you can access it. Now, you might say to yourself, well, Doc, what do I need to do? Do I need to talk to a psychic? Do I need to go to a therapist? Do I need to pay somebody like you $200 or $300 an hour? No, you don't. The easy and most least expensive way to do this, and this is so simple, it makes me smile, is to get in that vehicle, yours if you have one, go for a drive. We have this Edie's hook out here that the Coast Guard stations out in Port Angeles. Many a times when I have a lot of things on my mind, I will go by Frugals and get one of those vanilla shakes that I love. Small size, of course. I say that if Linda's watching, but I normally get the large size. And I go out on that hook and watch those cruise ships coming in and out of Seattle, because they have to go past us because we're right there on the border with Canada. I go out there to watch the seagulls do their dive missions. I go out there and watch the cats that are wild cats. But I bring a little cat food. You don't touch them because they might have rabies. But just watch them eat and seeing how much they appreciate it. It's like giving popcorn or French fries to a seagull. It's kind of good to feed those wild cats so they're not too desperate. But the bottom line is I can go out there, and even though it's only 10 or 15 minutes from my home in Port Angeles, a lot farther away from Black Diamond, unfortunately, and I can just sit there and think. And I do a lot of that early in the week when I lay out my schedules. And I actually block time off for what I call my time or me time. And I do that on purpose so that I have the time available to be able to do those things. But if you want to get in touch with your conscious and subconscious mind, one of the ways you can accomplish that is being able to get away, go up in the forest, go up somewhere it's isolated. Don't do it in the middle of a city or anything, but do it somewhere where you're isolated to where you can totally focus on exactly what you need to think about. And then come out of that little get-together by yourself, a crowd of one, and then be able to take that time to come to some decisions. And if not decisions, at least come back home to your significant other and say, I was sitting out there thinking about things, and this idea came in mind. What do you think? And bring in that dialogue so that the dialogue of a cognitive process is inclusive of your partner, or whatever the case may be. So to recap that again, is that you want to be careful you don't make reactionary decisions. You want to be careful that you think about all the processes involved, and again, we'll talk about that after the break. And then you want to turn around and get the input. The goal in life is to be happy. And if you want to be happy in life and enjoy life to its utmost, then making good decisions is a critical thing. A lot of attention is given to people who drink at the bars on Friday night or Saturday night and perhaps partaking too much alcohol to where they can be pulled over for a DUI. Well, that's obviously not a good decision, but you've got to think about that. And boy, believe me, the answer is give somebody else your keys, that is the designated driver, or call for the cab. Because if you get pulled over for a DUI, that's $10,000, $15,000. And if you have 3 of them, in the state of Idaho, I know for a fact, within 5 years, you become a felon. And we all know that alcoholism is a disease. It's not a symptom of life. So it's important to get in touch with your inner self and to be able to make good, solid decisions. You probably want to know what the plan is to get there. I'm going to talk to you right after the break on that. Once again, you're watching Life Journeys with Dr. Ralph Smith. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. I hope you enjoyed that break. And Sean promises me that he's going to have a lot of nice scenery shots out there. So if you ever do want to Google search, feel free to come out to Port Angeles, Washington, and come by and look me up. You know, you go to our website or you can Google search me, Dr. Ralph Smith, or Jenny Marie Wellness, and you'll have my numbers. Call me, and I'll take you out. I'll take you out to the hook. All right, well, let's get back at it. One of the things that is very important with the cognitive process is to literally make a list. And I'll give you a hypothetical example. Let's say you have a career move that would require you to move from the Northwest down to Los Angeles. And they're going to pay you 25% more in wages. They're going to give you a bigger title. Maybe they'll give you a car allowance and whatever. That decision on the surface may seem simple. You know, you're going to get promoted, maybe get a VP title, you have a car allowance, and you have more bucks to spend. Of course, I hate to break the news to you, but it costs a lot of money to live in LA. But for our sakes, we'll just talk about that, okay? Getting the positive and the negative impacts from those kind of decisions, which we call major life decisions, is simple as filling out a piece of paper. And here's how you do it. You start off with the positive side. And again, in our hypothetical example of LA, you could list the year-round weather, you could list the money that you're going to make, you could list the proximity to the beaches. The mountains are a little farther away, but even the mountains are close by. But there are negatives too. And so you want to list all the positives first of why this move makes a lot of sense. And I mean, folks, write it down on a piece of paper. Don't just try to talk about it. Take the time and write it on a piece of paper with a column marked positive. Write down the negatives too. Because when you're all said and done with this, before you sit down with your significant other or friends that you trust or family members, they need to take a look at this list and say, well, did you think about this or you think about that? And if you forgot about it, you need to list it before a major decision is made. Now, if it's a decision involving the whole family, then obviously the input of your partner is very important because you're dragging the whole family down based on your decision. Now, why am I so emotional about this? I made the typical mistakes that a lot of males make, and I think it's females to a certain degree now, but things were different when I first got out of school the first time. Of course, I was going to school most of my life. But there, the man was the decision maker. The woman stayed home and had dinner on the table at 4:30, 5 o'clock at night. The kids were managed and behaved, and probably the biggest role you had is either being a coach of the t-ball team or baseball team or soccer, and of course applying punishment. And if you believe in spankings, which I don't, but in the case might be. Well, things have changed a lot since then. Those were the way families were in the 50s and 60s, and growing up and being in your 60s, you can relate to that because that's the way you were raised. But instead, what we're talking about in cognitive is for you literally to make a list of positives and negatives. Let's go back to the hypothetical example. When you talk about the negatives in LA, there are a lot of negatives in LA. And I happen to know that. I went to high school, La Mirada High School, and went to college out there. So I'm pretty familiar, at least what it used to be in Southern California. Whereas it is to now, it's totally different. But negatives. Number one, crime. You know, there's some parts of Seattle that are very dangerous to live in, and I'm sure that's true in a lot of different cities. But you look at the issue of crime, it's got to be a big deal. From carjacking, drive-by shootings, to whatever it might be, if you're going to an area, even a nice, wealthy area, you've got to think about the crime issue and how that could possibly impact you or your family. Second part that would be negative, and again, this is a hypothetical example, is taxation. You know, the sales taxes, in this case of Southern California, are much higher than almost anywhere in the country, with the exception of New York and perhaps even Seattle now. I think Seattle's up to 11%. But in California, you have what we call the three-legged stool. You get hit with the financial impact of income tax, which can be quite a large amount of money. You get hit with property taxes, and most of those property taxes support the schools. So, you know, the need for schools continue to grow, so that property tax grows. And then you got the sales tax. And other than food in California, practically everything is taxed. I think there's a few labor exceptions there might be. But the bottom line is taxation is a huge issue. And as my dad used to always say, he would say, son, it doesn't matter how much money you make. It's how much money you have left after paying your obligations. And today that's probably more true than ever. So you got to look at those type of things. You got to look at the type of things of the communities you live in, realizing that if you've got kids that are going especially to high school, but even to a certain degree elementary school, the kids they're going to associate with, their type of values, like values and morals, could be different than what you're used to in a more controlled community. So that could be a risk, or it could be enlightening based on your particular point of view. You've got to look at the issue that maybe by moving down there, both partners will have to work to make ends meet. And that would change the whole issue of childcare and the raising of your children. That's an important major factor to look at. So these are the things that could possibly be negatives, let alone the smog, the earthquakes, and of course some of the storms they've had are pretty significant too. So I'm listening to a lot more negatives than positives, and yet this is the first time in the year 2021, and I know we watch these shows at different times of the year in different years, but there are more people who have left California than came in. It could be the COVID experience, I don't know, but the point is usually it's been the other way around because it's been a state of opportunity. And I've worked there, and I lived there, made money. Riots is another negative. I was there during the LA riots and covered it for the Idaho State Radio Network. And it's kind of scary running around in a news van and having people shoot at you. You know, media is not exactly one of the favorite friends of these kind of folks. And so you're a target as much as anybody else. And I think in my mind, if I remember correctly, is that we lost, I think the police chief said we lost like 90 or 100 people in the LA riot. Well, I did go to the morgue that they had while this riot was in full flow. The number was much, much higher, much, much higher. So these are the things that you have to look at. And the social mores or the social standard could be very different based if you move from a rural community to more of a city community. Now, you might think I'm being negative about moving to the big city. That is not the case. I'm just pointing out particular areas that you need to note as you do your positive and your negative list. Now, once you get that list done to the best of your ability, and you get input from your significant other, if there is a significant other, if you're living alone, you don't have to worry about that. Then what you need to do is think about the friends that you have. These are valued friends that you really respect their opinion. Again, it doesn't mean that you agree with their opinion, but it means that you feel that in their life experiences, their input would be valuable. And the first thing that you want them to do is take a look at the list and see if there's anything in this particular hypothetical example, but in any type of other major decision that you may have left off. Maybe the factors you didn't even think about. They can add to that. And then once they add to that list, both the positives and the negatives, then you've got to turn around and get their opinion and simply ask one question. Hey, Bob, what would you do if this was you and not me? And listen to what Bob has to say. Not so much his decision or his conclusion, but how he got there. And that gets back to the cognitive process. So it's very important that in some areas that are really, I call major life events, that you get as much input as you can. And then sooner or later, you'll go ahead and take the position, rightfully so, where you'll sit down with your partner and you'll look at it and say, okay, this is the list, this is the input from everybody. What should we do? And listen. You know, for whatever reason, when God created us, there are very few people that are blessed to be able to listen, to talk, and to think, and do all three functions at the same time. It's very rare. And when you have someone that tends to argue with you a lot, generally they're not engaging their brain. They're not engaging their listening skills. They're engaging this verbal approach because either they're very sensitive, they're very dominating, or they really are fearful of whatever conclusion may come about if they don't stress their opinion. And if you have a friendship with someone or a family relationship with someone, and it gets to the point that if you don't follow what they say, then you're out of the picture, then get rid of them. You don't need them. Conditional love is another show we're going to do in our next season. It's unacceptable because the conditions of someone who loves you or thinks they love you can vary so much year to year that you'll go nuts trying to figure out exactly where you stand with that particular person. So that is something you want to do, is get their input. The last piece of this, which is very, very important, and I talk about it in all the Life Journey shows, the last piece of this, which is so important, no Band-Aids. Now I know in life struggles that we have, if we cut ourselves or we get a blister or we get a bug bite or whatever the case might be, you put on the lotion, whatever it may be, you put a Band-Aid on it, and then hopefully in 4 or 5 days it's gone away. I really wish that life was that simple to where you could do that. But the reality is, life is not that simple. Life is much more complex. So the idea of using a Band-Aid approach is not a good answer. The only time I think you can make an exception for a Band-Aid approach to something is if you need a quick decision, you don't have time to be able to make the decision in a process where you do negatives and positives, and you just got to do whatever your gut tells you. You've got to do whatever would be the best thing that at that particular time. But it doesn't mean, however, that you shouldn't revisit it. If you use a Band-Aid solution on any life issues, and we've talked about the example about moving from one area to another, because that's hypothetical. However, most people will face that sometime in their lifetimes. And in my case, with my family, they faced it. I stopped counting after I got to 9 moves. But the point being is, it's such an upheaval in moves. And there's so many factors to consider other than, quote, the ego rush of having a bigger title or the financial rush of having no money, or more money, excuse me. Because if you focus totally on that and you're not spending the time at home that you should, you could perhaps lose the foundation of your relationship. And believe me, in dollars and cents, that's priceless. So you don't want to risk that. It's kind of balancing the ball between being a family and being a career. And for those lucky people that only have to do one, then God bless them. They're lucky. And unfortunately, I've never found myself in that situation. But perhaps they can. And then you got to make that. So, with that in mind, to recap, when you make a decision, the more thought you put into it, the process you use as far as positive and negative, the process of getting input from valuable family members and getting it from valuable friendships, and sometimes the friends are easier to deal with than family members, and then counting on your own life experiences that you have, because in your own life experiences you may have faced this situation before and you made a bad decision, and you might remember that and say, oh boy, if that ever comes up again, I wouldn't go that way. So you have all this information to draw from to be able to make the right decision. And by the way, if you don't make the right decision, don't be too hard on yourself. Nothing in life is guaranteed. No matter how smart people think they may be, they're not, they don't have all the answers. But it's an answer that is the most comfortable thing between you and your partner, and if you have a family, how it's going to affect the family. And everything else beyond that is just, to me, almost clutter in life. All right, to sum up, cognitive process, very important. Use this show, use these lessons I'm talking about today to be able to use those in making a decision and making good decisions that'll work for you. And remember, you do need input. But be easy on yourself. If you make a mistake, don't take it too personal. Don't run around in life fearful that, I'm going to make a mistake and what's going to happen to you. If you live life like that, you might as well live it in a closed room with no shades. Okay? So in other words, enjoy your life. Once again, this is Dr. Ralph Smith with Jenny Marie Wellness Centers. Appreciate you taking the time and tuning into the show, and look forward to meeting you down the road. Take care of each other, and God bless.